Hello, and welcome to Real Talk with Real Caregivers, featuring the caregiving.com Caregiver Champions, where we have real talk with real caregivers. Welcome everyone to Real Talk with Real Caregivers, featuring the caregiving.com Caregiver Champions. Thank you so much everyone for being with us here on our first episode. I want to start by doing some introductions so our viewers and listeners will get to know who you are. And I'll start with my esteemed co-host, Christina Keys.
Hi, everybody. My name is Christina Keys. I am the Director of Community Growth with caregiving.com. I've also been a family caregiver for my mother for 10 years. She passed in December. I am still a family caregiver for my ex-boyfriend, and I have been since 2019. Both my mother and my ex-boyfriend had a stroke.
Thank you, Christina. And Mr. Bill Cohen.
Hi, I'm Bill Cohen in Portland, Oregon. I was the caregiver for my mother, Sheila, for about 10 years. She passed away 10 years ago at age 83 from Alzheimer's.
Thank you, Bill. Lorette Fagini.
Very well done.
Thank you.
My name is Lorette, and I am originally from New York. I now live in San Francisco, and I was a long-distance caregiver for 10 years for both parents. Last year, I spent mostly in New York, supporting my brother and mom. Both had dementia and congestive heart failure.
Thank you, Lorette. Dr. Phelan Lewis.
Hi, everyone. My name's Phelan. I am a caregiver for my disabled mother. I have been since the age of 11. She has chronic pain, and also during the pandemic, she had a stroke as well. And I'm based in Nashville, Tennessee.
Thank you. Christy Byrne Yates.
Hi, everybody. I'm Christy, and I'm in Sacramento, California. And I cared for both my parents, and they both had some form of dementia. My dad had vascular dementia, my mother had Alzheimer's, and I cared for them for about 6 years, and they died in 2015, 7 weeks apart.
Tasha Wilson.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tasha Wilson. I'm originally from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. My home now has been in Houston, Texas. I was a caregiver at 25 years old for my dad, and now I'm currently a caregiver for my mother with dementia.
Thank you. Sarah Stelmach Brown.
Hello, my name is Sarah Stelmach Brown. I'm the host of Caregiver Chronicles podcast. I was a nurse's aide for 17 years. I was a backup caregiver for my grandmother with Alzheimer's, and also a caregiver for my two sons on the autism spectrum.
Thank you, Sarah. Teresa Wilbanks.
Hi, I'm Teresa. I cared for my dad for 7 years, and he passed a month after his 99th birthday in 2020.
Thank you. Ursula Garcia Mays.
Hello, I'm Ursula Garcia Mays, and I have a history of caregiving. I cared for my maternal grandmother for 18 months as she dealt with pancreatic cancer. Then my mother passed in 2020 for several complications, but COVID is what ultimately took her out. My bonus dad had a stroke shortly after my mom passed. I cared for him for a year and a half until he passed. And now I am long distance caregiving for my biological father and my mother's twin sister. My biological father's in New York, my mother's twin sister's in Virginia, and I live in Georgia.
Wow. Well, thank all of you for taking time out to be here today. And Christina and I are excited to, introduce this new show, Real Talk with Real Caregivers, featuring the caregiving.com Caregiver Champions, because we wanted to have a show that really highlights the real issues that family caregivers are facing on a day-to-day basis that sometimes can be overlooked or not even thought about. In today's topic, we're going to be talking about not losing yourself and still living your life as a caregiver. And the subject's really going to focus around two issues, and that's going to be, what did you lose as a family caregiver? But then how did you ultimately reclaim your life as a family caregiver, or once the caregiving had ended? And would anybody want to start off with the first question about what did you lose as a family caregiver?
Sure. So I think for me, it was understanding what the most important thing was in my life. And since I was long distance caregiving, it was easy to go back and forth for a weekend. That wasn't the problem. The problem occurred when I spent the last year in my hometown, in my old bedroom, with the things that drove me absolutely bonkers. So for me, what's really important to me is community And making a decision to go from a long distance caregiver on the other side of the country that just swoops in to save the day for a weekend and become the day-to-day caregiver was, for me, the big sacrifice was losing my community. Worked hard to create it, and then being back home every day with the purpose being helping my mother, which is wonderful, but not having the thing that gave me the energy to do it was something that initially I lost. And so what I did was to create another community, to reinforce the community I had here, and then create another community there, which wasn't always easy, but I used a lot of social media, and I also used a lot of reconnecting with people. So I would send my community in San Francisco videos and funny snippets and pictures and, just little skits that I would do with mom, or, anything to kind of keep them connected with what I was doing. And then in my hometown, it was nice because through social media, when I was posting all of this, I had some of my old friends. Luckily, I didn't get them too angry, would reach out and say, hey, I'm in a similar boat. What are you doing on Thursday? You want to take a walk? So it almost it gave me two communities, which was really good. I think the thing you talk about, because my mom passed in March and we did a lot of celebrating of her life, which helped myself and my brother. But then I also learned that I was really stepping into another caregiving role, which is what happens with so many of us, right? We do the role that we expect, which is for our parents, but I conveniently forgot that I have a sister who has a psychiatric disorder living in, I call it Timbuktu, but it's really Alaska. It just could be Timbuktu. And so I had to step in and then become a much more active participant, not only for the administrative side, but also just emotionally supporting her because she just had my mother. So it was, you just go with you have to go with the flow, but it's really a lot of recreation, reinforcing, and then finding out that you have a new role.
Right. And Teresa, I just wanted to follow up real briefly. As you were seeing your community, your first community that you were talking about kind of dissipating and you were being pulled further away from that, when did you start realizing I've lost my community? Was it immediately or was it gradual?
Well, I don't think, I just knew if I didn't do something, I would lose my community. I don't think they thought of me, but you start losing, you're not at the events that they're going to, you're not celebrating birthdays with them, you're getting invited, but you also know that your day-to-day commitment of taking care of a loved one, which isn't a sexy commitment, let's face it, it's not little cute kids. You can't do it physically, but that's what, after missing many of these events, I started realizing if I don't reconnect with them in a way that's genuine to me, right, then it's going to be really hard to, if I don't reconnect to them long distance, it's going to be hard to jump back in. And so I realized pretty quickly, once I saw the landscape, that I was going to be away for a while. So the other thing that I would do is I would fly back when I could for big events and, I just flipped my life. So then I would be going back to my community, my San Francisco community, for the big party, and then head back to being a caregiver. So I kind of kept myself in the loop in some way, maybe not 100%, but at least I was there for some big events that were going on.
Thank you for sharing that. Would anyone else like to take the first question? Christy.
Hi. Yeah. So I had sort of a different situation in that my parents had, long before they needed my care, they had purchased a long-term care policy, right, that only provided for assisted living. So I was the one who had to sort of say this is the time, so I got assessment because I needed a neutral party to sort of weigh in on that rather than it just be me. But I still managed a lot of their care. I went to all the doctor's appointments. My dad had vascular dementia, so he had a lot of different doctors to go see, and I went to all of those. Meanwhile, I was working full time, and I have my husband and I have 2 kids, and they were in really precious years at that point. My son was, they were both in end of middle school. My daughter was end of middle school. My son was in high school. And in fact, the year that my parents died was the year my son graduated from high school and then eventually went away to college. And I mention that because what I feel I lost in my caregiving journey was I have a very foggy memory of the last 2 or so years of my mom and dad's life. I remember, very crystallized moments, but that's a sadness for me that I was going at such a pace, caregiving, managing all of the things that were going on for them, making sure to get over to see them, 3-4 times a week, every weekend, bringing them home to our house for dinner when they were still able to do that. And then my kids with all their different things, and I'm glad I have some memories. There are some pictures, but I have a very foggy memory, which that's how I know I wasn't always present. I was just sort of pulled. And it's actually called the sandwich generation. And I didn't feel squeezed. I felt pulled. I felt like Elastigirl, right? Like I was getting pulled in every direction. And that's a loss that I feel. So what I learned in that process, what did help me was I journaled every night and I wrote things down, but I didn't necessarily write down, oh, this happened today. It was more like me just pouring my heart out, saying, here's how I'm feeling. Here's how I'm feeling. So I had some of those things. I think my health was really not, I did not necessarily take great care of myself. I wish I had. I have learned since then how to do that. And I wish I had asked for more help because I really thought I was supposed to do it all. My brother we're here in California. My brother is in Michigan. My sister's in Montana. They were wonderful and very supportive, but they couldn't just be here at a moment's notice, right? So it takes some planning, and we would plan sometimes where they could come in. And even then, I think I was still trying to be super caregiver by, orienting them to everything they needed to do so that it was all, and that was, I should have just taken that time to care for me, but that's where I think, for me, being a caregiver was pretty stressful, is that I was trying to do it all and be the consistent person, which I think was really good for my mom and dad. It was just hard on me. But I think the biggest piece for me was, I hope that I was there enough for my kids. Listen, my kids are really wonderful people, so apparently I didn't screw up too much, but it was really hard. And they were wonderful with my mom and dad, wonderful. So I feel like as hard as it was for them, they were compassionate with my mom and dad, and they were compassionate with me, thank goodness. So I was gifted with that. But yeah, so that's kind of my story there. Hope that answers your question.
No, it does. Thank you, Christy. I just want to follow up real briefly because you're the first one. And I know Lorette had mentioned siblings as well. Mm-hmm. How many of you had siblings involved that you felt helped your situation versus hindered your situation? And by hindered, I don't mean negatively in the sense of anything real dramatic, but oftentimes we come into contact with families, their sibling is, a state away or even 5 minutes away. And the primary family caregiver is trying to explain to their sibling what they're dealing with, what's going on with mom and dad. And I'll just say they're blissfully ignorant, and they're like, oh, I just talked to mom and she's fine. And that kind of adds more stress onto you as a family caregiver. Did any of you have that experience? No, that's good.
Can I just say, I didn't really have them hindering me, but I also sort of at the beginning, I started feeling like they were giving me advice I wasn't asking for. So I had a very serious conversation with both of them. And I just said, here is what support would sound like for me. Here is what it would look like for me. Like, please don't second guess me. If I need your input, I will reach out and ask for it. But for me, support would look like this.
Right.
just help me out when I asked for it, because I didn't want to have a committee on everything, but they were far away. So they didn't. And I totally get what you're talking about, Lance, because I have friends who are going through that, where people have differing opinions and everybody gets involved, and then it gets difficult. So it is a very hard thing to maneuver. Good question.
I love that you were able to, Christy, say to them, this is how you can support me. I got to say, the whole topic of siblings being either helpful or not helpful, or family in general, man, that could be a whole nother show. Because I think many of us have had so many different experiences with that. And even trying to maneuver that can be as difficult as caregiving sometimes. I think some of you would agree. So
Absolutely. I see Sarah had her hand up, and then I'll try to go in order of the hand. Sarah, you wanted to add something?
I did. Thank you so much. I just wanted to say, like, the parenting aspect and kind of piggyback off that, because I was in a sort of similar situation where I was a professional caregiver. I was helping my mom caregive for my grandmother and caring for my kids with special needs. And I had to leave my job to care for my kids, which when you're a parent of kids with special needs, or a caregiver for anybody, let's face it, that's one of the biggest things that you do lose. Losing your sanity and trying to get help. And what does help look like? And unfortunately, I was doing this during pandemic years where there was no help with my children. I was trying to homeschool them. And I can just, relate to what you're saying about missing out caring for my kids, or missing my kids' events because I was so busy caring for other people. And that's probably one of the hardest things as a caregiver parent that I have had to deal with and accept. And I just wanted to add that in there and just applaud you for doing the best you could through all of that situation.
Absolutely. And Sarah, would you say that was one of the biggest things you felt you lost during that time?
That and my sanity. Yeah. That was the two biggest things for me.
Yeah. Thank you,
thanks
Sarah.
for bringing that up, Sarah.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of caregivers, they go from being, everything's wonderful, but then there's a lot of things that happen because we're trying to maneuver through so many things. Sanity is something that a lot of us have lost at times, our rational ways to, respond to people because we're exhausted. So, and you mentioned too, losing your job. Is that correct? I think a lot of us have lost our jobs and our careers and had to recreate. How many of us have had to recreate our careers because of caregiving? Right. Had to leave our careers? Yep. Okay.
Well, and like Lorette said earlier on, she lost her social circle, her community. Mm-hmm. There's not an area, I think, as a family caregiver that doesn't get touched or affected in one way or another. Ursula, you had your hand up next, I believe.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I kind of wanted to add to what Chrissy was saying. I lost a sense of self in there. My health went down. I was so consumed with making sure that everyone else's health was up to par, or that they were comfortable where they were, in their situations. I forgot to take care of me. And it lasted for quite a while until I realized that self-care is not selfish, and I had to take care of me. It was more, not so much the mani-pedi kind of self-care. It was really taking care of my health. My health was failing. And I'm sure we've all heard that oftentimes the caregiver tends to pass before the care recipient. I did not want that to be my story. And so I had to focus on Ursula yet again. And to the same context of what Christina was saying about losing the job, I had to resign from my 10-year position, which I thought, that was my purpose in life. I'm supposed to be here helping, doing what I'm doing. It was always in the area of help, but I had to let that go in order to fully commit to being a full-time caregiver. And that was challenging. So I lost myself in different ways.
Yeah. Ursula, if I can just ask you a quick question, because
Yes.
You're still a family caregiver today. And
Yes.
when you look back to when you were, helping your bonus dad, and now you're helping your aunt, I believe, and your
Yes.
biological father, how are you a different caregiver this time around than you were the first time?
I've learned, again, like I said earlier, that self-care is not selfish. I take care of Ursula first. I am no good to my dad and to my aunt if I am not okay. So I make sure that I take care of me first, and then I'm able to pour out more to them, to give more time and energy and support to them, because it is a different level, a different system of caregiving now, because it's long distance. They're not in the house with me like my parents were. So I'm having to, as Laura said, create different communities. I have a community in New York, resources there, and back in Virginia.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Ursula. Tasha, I think you might have had your hand up before Dr. Phelan. I apologize if I got that wrong, but we'll go with Tasha first.
I appreciate everyone and what they're saying. My situation is a bit different because I'm an only child. So my dad since passed away at 25. He actually lived additional year. So that was when I was 25. My mom, I'm now 41. And I have had, comparing the two, I like that question, because when I had my dad, it was a lot of anger, a lot of just, it was just a lot that was going on because I didn't understand why I had to do this at first. And I would engulf in different things inside of myself, like, I'm supposed to be able to figure this out. At least that's what I was always entrenched to, and taught to do. So I had to go through a lot of counseling, therapy, and getting back to myself. And so now here it is at 40, at the time, 30, in my 30s, ending of my 30s, presented with this with mom. I had to give up a career in education and then transition myself into something that was more flexible. So now I have the ability to work from home. I also have a boss who is also an only child, who actually is pretty understanding and flexible when certain things happen. That doesn't always happen for everybody. But at the end of the day, I've had to find different self-care techniques, different just times when I just have to break away. And then thankful that God blessed me with a wonderful husband who was also a caregiver for his mom, which that has also kind of hindered our relationship as a couple, because, there are times when we can't do certain things, but we are having to take moments and pockets to be with one another, whether it's date night, forming some form of a date night, or even if it's just, let's just go sit down and have dinner or make dinner just together. So we're finding little pockets to for me to rejuvenate myself, but then also to be present, because with this particular condition of dementia, and I'll just put it out there. So like, mom was diagnosed, she had a stroke in 2021. I was in education then, and during the time when she had the stroke, I was on lockdown in a middle school. All right. So I couldn't even get to my mom. Thankful that we had to build a community. And that's one of the things, as an only child, I've had to build pockets of communities. But first thing I had to do was realize that I got to be able to say no and not keep this in, and then be able to share that with other people in the best way possible. So then when dementia hit, I didn't know what to do with that. So and that hit right before I finished grad school. So just imagine you're supposed to defend and you're at a doctor's appointment and you're like, okay, your mom has dementia, and I didn't know what to do with that. What am I supposed to do with that? I don't know what that's supposed to look like. So it's empowered me to even more do a mix of self-care and also education for myself, because I didn't know what this was going to look like, and just being able to build certain communities, certain things to kind of help that along the way. Sometimes we, like right now, we're failing this week, but realizing that, just as my husband tells me all the time, you've done your best and that's all you can do. And so I have to adhere to that daily. and breathe and drink water, as you can see, and all of that good stuff. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Tasha. I just want to follow up. You said it had taken you a while to find out you needed to take care of yourself, and you started your own self-care. What did Tasha do for self-care?
Tasha does music loud. I can sing. I just sing. Coloring. We just had a 2-week hospital stay with mom in the hospital for a UTI in the luxury of St. Luke's Hospital. Okay, me and my husband. So I found a coloring book that's all trees. I love trees. Just different little artsy different things. And then sometimes it's just going someplace and just sit and just be with God. I just need to have that silence and time with God because, Father, I don't know what this is going to continue to look like, but I'm just going to trust in you that you're going to take this whole car that is going on and you're going to guide us through this. And even just to have a moment to cry. Like, there are moments when I find myself just got to have that moment to just let it all out. And I'm not ashamed to do so. And of course, you know, regular therapy appointments, my counselor, you know, all of those things to just make sure that I'm mentally well, and even exercise, walking, all of those fun things, because at the end of the day, you know, my husband and I, we still want to have a family. So it's like trying to balance all of those things in the midst of caregiving.
So you practice self-care when and how you can, basically. It doesn't have to, It's not always on a set routine. You just get it in when you're able to.
Or I at least try to get it in at least a moment of every day. Yeah. I mean, even if it's just a moment where I just need to stare off into space, or I need to just write something down, or whatever it looks like. I just have to get it in some form of moment, or even if it's just breathing. Mm-hmm. I just want to be able to feel like I've taken that moment and that moment is just for me. And that's all that matters. I'm not worried about the obligations and the things that are around me. Mass majority of the time, my husband kind of steps in anyway, because he can tell that it's like she's reached her limit. Let me power in, and he's wonderful with that. But I do know that everybody's situation is not that same, right. But that's just for me as Tasha. So.
Well, that's kind of, go ahead, Christina.
I think that's a game-changing moment. It was in my care journey, and from a lot of other people's in their care journey, when they realized how to redefine self-care, right? Because a lot of us, we did have careers, we did have a life where we could do whatever we wanted, when we wanted. It was mani-pedi, spa, vacations, time at the beach. When I got to that place, and what I've heard from a lot of other folks, when we got to that place of saying, hey, self-care needs to be, like Lance mentioned, when we can and how we can. And that comes in 1, 2, 3, and 4 minutes at a time in the beginning. And we have to get pretty creative about what self-care looks like. Absolutely. So thanks for talking about that, you guys.
Thank you, Tasha.
Should we have Faylin go next?
Yeah, Faylin.
Yeah, I was going to say, Christina, my self-care looks like the moments in the shower when there's absolute peace and you're undisturbed. That's my piece of sanity. I just wanted to answer the question about what you lose along your journey of caregiving. And for me, since I started caregiving for my mom at age 11, for me, that's meant that my entire life essentially has been consumed with anxiety, worry, fear, and thoughts about my mother and her health and her care. And that's something that I realize as a millennial that is different than my peers whose parents are actually still healthy and haven't had serious health issues yet. Although, of course, with our age, we're getting towards that time. Well, that will start happening. But I have realized there is such a difference in that. I think Ursula mentioned that being consumed with thoughts of the person that you care for. And I would not have it any other way, as in I'm so grateful that I've always had this time with my mother, but I also recognize that makes me very different from other young people, that I've always just had this other person that I always have to think about how my career will affect my mother, finances, everything about this other person. And that makes me different than other young people.
What have you been able to share with your peers? Because, like you said, most of our peers are older parents. They may have those situations, but when you're younger, it's hard for them to really understand what you're going through, because I like to say, thankfully, they haven't had to go through it. And I kind of went through something similar in college, Phelan, and it changed the entire trajectory of my career as well. But nobody really could relate to what it was I was going through, because thankfully for them, they hadn't had to go through that yet. What was that like for you, trying to relate to that and hoping to get some sort of affirmation from them that may not have been there because, again, they can't relate to it?
Yeah, I learned pretty early on that my friends couldn't relate. But the more that I get out and I do this, like the advocacy work or the research that I do, I realize that there's so many other young people who do have stories like mine. I was just isolated, and I just thought I was the only one who was a younger age caregiver. But really, I would just say that it's important to remember what you're doing is important, it's valuable, and also, as all of you will have echoed on the call, that you have to take care of yourself and prioritize yourself. And that's really what I think am attempting to learn as I think about regaining what I've lost, is recognizing my own agency, my own power. What do I do have? What do I do have power to change? My own happiness and joy in life. I'm still in control of that. And that's important for me to recognize, and my own power and my own experience.
And you specialize in resources, advocacy, educating minority caregivers, caregivers in poverty. If I'm getting this correctly, please, if not, correct me. If we'd have talked to you before mom got sick, or like maybe Phelan at 10 years old, would you have been in this position had you not been a family caregiver?
Oh, no, absolutely not. I think at 10, I wanted to probably be a teacher, a doctor, or something else. But, so I always say, like, as much as it was honestly something that was catastrophic for my family. I'm grateful for the ability to, one, have a career where I get to travel the world and talk to other young age caregivers about their experience and learn. Because really what we're all doing here is so powerful. I really, truly believe that we can change society by these calls, by the advocacy work that we're doing. So I don't take it for granted, and I don't regret it. But as you all have all experienced, it was certainly something that was difficult every step of the way.
Teresa, you had your hand up?
Just to answer the question. So, I would say for me, it was a slippery slope from helping out to burning out. And my husband and I moved back from France to care for Dad. We'd been there for 7 years and probably wouldn't have moved back. I don't feel like we really, we'd been there for 7 years, so didn't really give that up. But I lost my compassion. And the way it looked for me is I remember looking in the mirror and not recognizing myself and being concerned that this person who I had become was going to be me for the rest of my life. And I can remember standing in line at the grocery store. The person in front of me was, laughing and chatting with the checkout clerk. And I thought, I used to be that person, and I was angry and frustrated and watching that. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not in a hurry, but I don't recognize, that being able to feel those emotions when all I could feel was the anger and frustration. And so I had to deconstruct what was happening. And I've heard several of you say the emotions. I had to figure out what's going on, because it didn't seem like I should not be able to handle these responsibilities. And as I did that, I did see that there was a lot of fear behind them. And that helped me. When I understood what was happening, I could deal with it better. I felt guilt, but I don't think it was guilt now. I think it was shame, and it was grief. There was a lot more there. So the capacity for compassion started to come back as I focused on self-care, as so many of you have said. And I call it compassion reserves. And that's something that going forward, I was able to really pay attention to and recognize when I was starting to lose, when those reserves were getting depleted. And then I could refocus on self-care. So fortunately, I didn't lose it like many of you. We may have lost something, on the journey, but in finding it, I also found coping skills that are helping me still today.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Teresa. Bill, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on what Teresa was saying. I so identify with what you're saying. There was a moment the last year of my dad and mom's life. We were having dinner at home, and my dad, I had prepared this really nice meal. I thought, oh, this is going to be great, great memories for them. my husband, my kids, my mom, my dad, but my dad couldn't hold the fork well. He couldn't feed himself. He couldn't, it was just, and I was getting irritated and I was just, I was not nice. And I'm like, oh, I guess I'll just have to feed you. I mean, I was just rude and horrible. And I looked up and I saw the horror on my children's faces. And my son mouthed the words to me, Mom, be nice. And I thought, it was like cold water in my face. And I thought, oh my God. And I stopped. I kind of went through and regrouped and we finished out dinner, and my husband took my parents home, and as I'm washing up the dishes, my son came over and my daughter came over, and they both just hugged me, and I just bawled. And I really became aware that I was showing them how not to take care of someone. Like, this was not the training ground we should have been on, right? This was not what and I really came in touch with, for me, it was grief. That was how my grief showed up. I was already, it was like, I've learned the term since then, anticipatory grief. I was watching my parents sort of fade away, and it was horrifying to me. And I had to start to think about, not only how do I care for my parents, but what am I demonstrating to my kids? And so, our children learn so much from what they see us do, not what we tell. I would never have allowed them to talk to my parent like that. And here I was doing it. And it shifted. It shifted for me how much I really had to take care of myself, but also be real about my emotions and share with my kids how I was doing and ask them for help. But that's what so Teresa, I totally get that, like this mirror of like, this is not who you are and not who you want to be for your kids. So I really appreciate your share.
Christy, would you say that for you on your caregiving journey for your parents, that was your turning point?
It was one of the turning points, because it was sort of towards the end. It was a turning point of, I need to really change how I am, not only for my parents, for them to have a great rest of their lives, whatever that might be, but also for my kids, and myself, right? I mean, I win when they win. It's not hard to love someone. It's hard to be honest with yourself about the amount of grief you're feeling, and then dealing with it in a healthy manner. And so I had to be more honest with myself about what I was going through and ask for help. But yes, for sure, Lance, it was definitely a seminal moment that helped me be better for myself and my kids, and my parents towards the end of their life. That was really good. It was a wake-up call that I needed.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Lorette, you had your hand up?
I just want to chime in really quick here. I think as caregivers, we're so hard on ourselves, right? I mean, how many times did you guys stop and say, hey, I now have a second job, which is caring for a loved one. I now am watching my loved one decline. I now am grieving that. I'm now grieving me losing my life and my life changing. I'm now in a completely different financial situation, and give ourselves some grace that we would give the person that we were caring for, right? I don't think anybody, we did that early on in our care journey. We might have done it after some therapy or many years of our care journey, but allowing us some of the grace that we would give the person we're caring for. And I think we've all had those moments, Teresa and Christy, where it's like, we're so burned out. We're so full of so much grief. And, we aren't trying to be mean, or it's just too much, and it's too painful. Right. So I just thank you guys for sharing that. And Bill had his hand up, and is it okay if we go to Bill real quick and have him answer the question?
Let's go to Bill.
I appreciate that. And yeah, as I was starting to say earlier, no situation is better or worse or easier or harder. It's just different. If you had told me about 18, 19 years ago what was going to transpire, and I'd be sitting here talking to you all today and doing what I do, I'd say, you're crazy. You couldn't make it up. So not far from Baton Rouge and all that, my mom was living in Biloxi, Mississippi, and she was showing signs of something. And I'm going to move right ahead in the story. She lost her home in Hurricane Katrina. And whatever was starting to happen with her, accelerated and exasperated her condition. And I started becoming a long distance caregiver after she evacuated to first North Carolina with other family and then Delray Beach, doing the cross country travel while holding down a full-time job, and eventually moved her back out here to Portland, Oregon, which went well. And that's different. I mean, wherever they are, you're thinking about them 24/7. I didn't do too much hands-on caring with my mom. She certainly wasn't going to let me bathe her. It was my mom, but I always made sure she was safe. She was getting good care, right? But in terms of losses, I think I lost my health. I lost my confidence while I was holding down the job that I could not afford to lose. Thank God for FEMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act. I had a micromanager narcissistic boss. So you can imagine where my blood pressure was, sky high. So, like I said, I could not afford to lose that, but I got very close many times to that boss. And because of my situation, the proverbial take this job and you know what you can do with it. But then it got into, self-care became important. One of the first things I did after the loss of the hurricane, because I had to deal with all those, as others have alluded to, the taking care of the property, finances, taxes, my mom's care, everything. I started going to a support group with the Alzheimer's Association. Coincidentally, I'm still leading that same group 18 years later, and a couple of others. Started using my benefits and getting counseling and other things. But there at the workplace, one of the things I did was a chair massage. That sounds good. That's short. I could take that short 10-minute break. Nobody's going to say anything. And that became, I embellish on what was said. I think it was Ursula, self-care isn't selfish. It's vital. And to me, a regular massage became not a luxury, but a necessity. And I still do it to this day. And I would get away from my desk, the proverbial cube, right? So I'm trying to keep my mind on things. The phone rings in the care community and the stress level goes up. Oh God, is mom okay? Fortunately, they'd always say, don't worry, Sheila's fine. But you're that ups and down, that roller coaster every day, right? Because you never know what you're going to get, whether you're there with them. And by the way, my workplace was almost an hour away from her care community when she moved out here. So I'd go up there. One thing that helped was my family. Although nobody was out here except my wife, and she helped me. She supported me so I could take care of mom. My family. Regarding siblings, to your question. A lot of people say, Bill, do you have any brothers or sisters? I say it's better that he's not involved. Let's put it this way. Mom would have ended up on Medicaid a lot sooner if my brother had become POA. And he was absent. He wasn't around. They were two artists. God bless them. They're wired different than we are, but they were, codependent, enabling thing. It was a complicated relationship. My aunts had a lot of opinions, but they always had my mom's best interest at heart. They didn't have other agendas. They weren't unsolicited advice, right? Without knowledge or having other ideas in mind, maybe selfish, right? But I always listened to them, but they knew my name was on the paper. I had the power of attorney, the advance directive. So my family was helpful. My wife was helpful, but I really was the solitary guy taking care of almost all of it, except one of my aunts did move out here from Manhattan and ended up staying to help take care of mom. So we took turns going to see her at the care community. So it could be a lonely journey, but as some were alluding to, I think it's important to ask for that help. Have that list of, think about all the things we do or did for our loved one. Cook, teacher, laundry, driver, medical point, you name it, bookkeeper. We do it all. If you list them all and you just say to somebody, hey, can you handle this one thing? I bet most people would say yes, because most people want to help in some way.
And you're not being paid for it either.
Exactly. Right. So it can be a long journey, but if you ask for help and you get the right support, And I think your community, as was alluding to before, you had your Lorette, you had two different sides of country. I think my community became my support group.
Yeah.
That Alzheimer's Association group was so good. I like to say, if that had not been a good experience, I would have walked away when Mom passed away and said, I'm done, I'm burned out, I'm through. I became the facilitator, and the rest is history.
Those support groups can be game changing, right? Has anybody else been a part of a support group? Everybody here is game changing. Just to hear somebody, other caregivers, your peers say things like, man, I really want to quit my job as a caregiver, but it doesn't mean we don't love the person we're caring for, right? But if you say that to somebody who's not in a caregiving role, there might be some judgment or whatnot, right? So their support groups are game changers in your care journey. I think Brett had her hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little. A lot of us have talked about long distance caregiving. I think Ursula's caring for someone long distance. I know Bill had to do it, Teresa. And when I was thinking about it, there's a reason for me personally that I was long distance, right? My family love them and they drive me absolutely bonkers, And so that's one of the things that resonated a little bit with me. Like all of a sudden, there's a reason I was a long distance, and you have to make that decision of, do I accept the call for help or not? And not all of us can. 3 years ago, I couldn't do it because I was dealing with other stuff. I decided to do it, but it's a big decision, and it's a hard decision. And I think people have to remember it's okay if you make the decision that you can't. And that's a whole other topic of conversation, but it's really, because I wanted to be long distance. It's not like I didn't want to be long distance. I wanted to go home for 2 days. That was my max. I was tapped out. And to go back and stay all that time as a caregiver was tough. That's why I needed the community. So it's, I think people have to remember it's okay if you don't want to make long distance local, because there's a reason it's there in the first place. So just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Ursula, you had your hand up.
I wanted to go back to the family and sibling support for just a moment. Like Tasha, I am my mother's only child, my biological father's oldest child. With my mother, she was a mom to many. There were so many that called her Mama Sheila, et cetera, et cetera. And I loved it. I loved that there were people that adored her enough, that respected her enough. And she was a foster mom and all, a godmother and all these good things. So she had a lot of children in her life. When it came to her end of life care and things of that nature, I had a vision prior to my mother passing, and I shared it with my husband. And what I saw in that vision was exactly what happened. Everyone who claimed to be in love with Mama Sheila and wanted to be a part of her life, where were they when I needed them in the end? So there were some who just fell off. Then there were others who wanted to voice their opinion about what to do and how to handle her funeral. No, thank you. You weren't there when I needed you. When I did get up enough courage to reach out and ask you for your support or for your help, you weren't there. Now you want to tell me how I should have her service? No, thank you. I pass. With my bonus dad, he has a son, and my brother and I, he's in California, and he gave me full authority. He says, listen, you're there. You're in Virginia with them. You do what you need to do. You take care of daddy. I'm here to support you, however that is. And so because I had to resign from my job and do all of that, my brother didn't take care of my bills. Thank God for my husband. Like you, Tasha, I have a God-sent husband. But my brother did help. He helped from a distance, and I was grateful for that. We communicated effectively. There's communication, then there's effective communication. We communicated effectively. I even tried at that point to re-engage with some of those family members that love mom and dad, and I put them on a schedule. Honestly, of the 10 people initially that said, oh, I'm here to help you because you have to move them into your home, blah, blah, blah. 3 of them supported me through that entire journey. Wow. That was heartbreaking. I get a little emotional. So that was heartbreaking. because you were there. My parents did everything for everybody as much as they possibly could. And then when I needed, or when they needed, really, they needed the support at, during the end of life, it wasn't there. With my biological father, like I said, I'm his oldest, and laugh if you may, Papa was a Rolling Stone. There are 5 of us. None of us have the same mother. We all live out of state except one. She's in New York with him, and she's there this much. She's right, maybe 30 minutes from him. And her response is, well, I'm a single mom. I have to take care of my daughter. Yeah, but I'm like 8 states away. Can you take him to the doctor's appointment? Just little things. And then there came a point where a decision had to be made about his health and a particular procedure he needed. And I went to my siblings and I asked them, what do you think I should do? How do you think I should handle it? Because this is what he wants. And I gave my opinion as to what I thought should be done. And they told me, if you do it that way, we're probably not going to speak to you again. That's painful.
Right.
That's hurtful. Who wants to hear that? I wanted their support. I thought I was making the best decision, for him. And I also thought I was doing the right thing by trying to engage them in this. And not just because I'm POA, let me make this decision on my own. I wanted to engage them. He's your father as well. So let's have a conversation. Let's talk about what we think may be best for him. They told me if I made the decision to follow his wishes, that they were probably not going to speak to me again. That's yeah.
We're
that's
put in
painful.
tough situations like that a lot, aren't we, you guys?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Well, and Ursula, I just wanted to follow up real briefly, then we'll go to Tasha. For viewers or listeners who might be listening to this, episode and hearing this story from you that are dealing with similar situations, like Christina just said, that's far too common than it really should be. Did you have any closure with those friends and family members, or how did the relationships ever mend themselves, or are they still broken? And if you did mend them,
I'm a forgiving person.
Okay.
I am a very forgiving person. And I'm the oldest grandchild and all of that good stuff. So I am the one who typically has been able to step out to the family members and say, hey, listen, I made a mistake, or I feel like we can get around this or get through this. I typically am always the one to do that, because that's just how I am. Everyone is not built that way. Right. That's not who we are. And that's okay. But I would say, again, try to communicate it with them. Don't let that hinder you moving forward in life, especially if you had a strong relationship with this person previously. Maybe that's just their way of dealing with the loss of this person.
Right.
That may have been part of their grief journey. And so, and that's what I had to understand, was that I grieve differently. They may have been grieving the loss of this person, the support that they had from my mom and from my dad. And so they, rather than support them or try to be there for me during the process, they just stepped away. That was their way of dealing with it. So I would simply say, try your very best to be forgiving and understanding that is part of their journey. They're dealing with it differently. We all deal with these situations differently.
It's great advice. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you, Ursula. You know what I love about all this is that so many times we all feel alone as caregivers. How many of you have felt alone and isolated on your care journey, like many times, right? But here we are. What is there? Like 9 or 10 of us here, all different stories, all different areas of the world, all different types of care situations. But many of us are shaking our heads like, yes, that was us too, right? And I love that. And what it makes me know on my care journey is I don't have to feel alone, because I can go anywhere in a group of caregivers, right? And there's 5 or 6 of you who are going through the exact same feelings as me. The situation might not be the same. The distance might not be the same. The people we're caring for, their ailments might not be the same, but we're feeling a lot of the same things. We're experiencing a lot of the same things emotionally and mentally and, physically and spiritually. So just thank you guys for sharing your story.
Absolutely.
Say this, in reality, it won't matter 5 years from now. Don't spend more than 5 minutes being angry about something. Let it go. It's not good for our health. So just let it go as best you can. Let it go.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you. Tasha, you had your hand up?
Whew, everything that Ursula just said, I track with so very well. And I'm gonna try not to cry when I say that. With my dad's situation, placed by his own brother in my hands, basically saying, look, I'm not gonna be able to do this. This is your responsibility as his child. So here I am. And even with other family members, they have a lot to say. But at the end of the day, it's like none of them, aside from just saying, oh, I'm going to keep you all in prayer. And while I do stand behind prayer, all right, but it's a difference when you're actually coming in and just asking me, what do you need? I've had church members. I've had my sorrows. Two of my sorrows were actually attorneys that came in, and when I needed POA, anything, they have been right there every step of the way, anything legal, which has been a blessing. It's, I'll just say this, I've had to learn truly to love the way that God loves, and to realize that I can be angry, because I stayed angry for a very long time because, you know, I didn't know. And I tracked with what Teresa said. How do I have compassion for you, enough for you, but you can't even show up for me to even track what's going on? But everyone is at different levels. So what I've done in due diligence, because see, on both sides of my family, we have a tendency to not talk about things. Just don't talk about it. You know, we don't want to face it. We don't want to talk about it until it's right there. Hey, I'm going to send you this link. This is how you can track with mom. Wherever you feel like you can fit in, great. If it's sending well wishes, if it's this, I'm having to manage that. But the overarching thing is, I want my mom, and I've done that even with my dad, I wanted them to have the best quality of life for as long as it possibly can. And another thing that I tracked with, one of the best things that I could have ever done was I moved mom after, you know, my own cousin decided, oh, your mom can't stay with us anymore, so you need to move. Which it was the best thing, because we moved her here. And of course, fourth largest city in the nation, great medical center, was able to curtail that based as opposed to Louisiana. I love my home state, but they backwards. Aside from that, you know, my church community, all of that. And I plugged into different support groups, but I haven't necessarily found one that solidifies on my turf. Like, because, you know, sometimes I feel like I can take what I need from different ones. And I haven't found one that I can really just say, oh, this is home in tracking with all of the changes, all of the things, all the different stuff. So I'm still searching for that. But forgiveness is so important, and love in the midst of all of that, and just being thankful. Gratitude for whatever shows up. And I've had to learn that gratitude in so many different instances. So that's all I had to say. So
Thank you.
You said a
Lance,
lot.
I'm gonna
You
say-
said a lot.
Yeah, thank you very much. I love, again, how we're so diverse, so many different care journeys, so many different, you know, ways that we're caring for people. I just want to, again, because we all go through a lot of the same things. How many of us lost our job and our career and had to recreate a career? Okay. How many of us, you know, there was a change in our relationship, you know, as amount of dates we could go on, or our marriage or whatever, or actually lost a relationship, right? How many of us lost friends and friend circles, right? How many of us lost a piece of us that it was a journey to get back? So, and then how many of us, again, were able to get that back by doing small amount, redefining what normal was, right? It is normal that we have this much stress, right? It is normal that we're going to the hospital so much that we're trying to balance all this. How many of us like found it normal to have to recreate what self-care was and start 5 minutes at a time? 1 minute. Who started 1 minute at a time with self-care? Okay. And who had to build up over a couple weeks to 5 minutes at a time, right? Okay. Thank you guys for, just being somebody who's been on a caregiving journey, just like myself and so many others. And everything you guys have said, I related to so much. So thank you guys for sharing your experience today.
And I just want to echo Christina and say that I think champions may be an understatement. I'll say heroes, because taking on these roles, as you guys have demonstrated, it takes a tremendous fortitude, commitment, emotional, physical, and financial commitment as well. And it's a lifestyle change. And one word that nobody, I believe, used that I personally think is lost often when you become a family caregiver, and that's identity. Identity is, who you are, what you are, who you're with, what you do. And oftentimes, as demonstrated by your stories, you changed all of that, and it changed trajectories and your lives for the better. Because I don't think caregiving as a family member is always doom and gloom. There are good days and bad days. There's ups and there's downs. But I think all of you may be in agreement that none of you would be here today if your journey and your experience was so horrendous that you wanted to run as far away from it as you can. Instead, you're running as close to it as you can by being these advocates, by being caregiving.com champions, and doing things in your own personal lives as well to raise awareness and support other caregivers. And I just want to thank all of you so much for your time today, getting to know some of you better than previously. And for our viewers and listeners, this is episode 1. And the next topic, and maybe some of the same caregiver champions, is going to be the financial struggles and solutions when being a family caregiver. And we hope viewers and listeners will tune in. And I just want to say thank you all so much for your time today, and look forward to seeing some of you again in the future. Thank you for joining us today at Real Talk with Real Caregivers, featuring the Caregiving.com Caregiver Champions. To learn more about the Caregiving.com Champions program, visit caregiving.com/champions. Also, stay tuned for the National Family Caregiver Summit presented by Caregiving.com, coming on November 10th and the 11th. This is a fully virtual event that you won't want to miss. We look forward to seeing you next time here at Real Talk with Real Caregivers.